Hello and welcome to Rice YouTube channel. My name is Abud Shah, and in today's editorial explain session, we will cover an article related to a important judgment which has been recently passed. The article of the title is Right of Way. The article surfaced into today's The Hindu newspaper, that is on 20th of June. We at Rice IAS has pointed out all the important facts which are important for an aspirant to know from this article and related to the judgment. And from that, we have prepared a holistic article for you so that you get a fair enough picture about the topic, keeping in mind your foundational knowledge, and you are updated with the current affairs. Okay. The next big thing where this article is going to help me in my preparation. This article is going to help you in GS-2 paper polity and governance. And second, the title of our article is somewhere similar to the title of the actual editorial, but on a elaborative stand. Though right of way is the fixed part, but strengthening pedestrian right and urban mobility in India. Next thing, if a question from this article has to appear, how can I have a perception about it? How can it be? The model question is in front of you. The right to walk in an essential right to walk is an essential component of right to life or under Article 21. Discuss the challenges faced by pedestrians in India and or Indian cities and suggest measures to create pedestrian friendly urban spaces. 15 marks, GS paper 2 polity. Okay, once we have got the background of the motive or the motive of making this article clear and a model question in mind, now we can directly jump into the content. The first part is the context or why in news. We see the Supreme Court has recently reaffirmed that right to walk on safe and an unobstructed footpath is a fundamental right under Article 21 through its recent judgment. Related to that, we have made a holistic article. So, starting of any article or any answer of yours in the main should be with introduction. The very first part would be the court has emphasized that introduction. The court has emphasized that safety and accessibility are integral to right to life and dignified urban living under the so-called assumption or the notion of Article 21. Now, once the introduction or the context and then the introduction is set, let's now go a little backward and see what does it signifies to have a pedestrian rights in place. We would see all those significance onto multiple heads. The first head would be this idea has a constitutional significance. Firstly, the right to walk or flow directly from Article 21, that is right to life and dignity, therefore at most important for our constitution and making it or making it very important for our life. Second, accessible public space enables somewhere effective enjoyment of fundamental right also, where the idea is in letter into the constitution. These kind of changes or having is somewhere implementation into this spirit, where accessible public space ensures that you have a effective enjoyment of all those rights which have been ensured in the constitution. The second would be the social significance. First, walking remains the primary mode of transport for most of the section of the society, mostly the vulnerable and the low income group. Therefore, it is somewhere creating a equity in place on the basis of Article 14. And safe footpath promotes inclusive and equitable urban mobility, again pointing to the same idea. If we trace it to the economic significance, we will get to see walkable cities reduce transport cost. At the same point of time, dependency on private vehicle, which effect can be seen into environmental significance, which we will see in some moment. And better pedestrian infrastructure improves access to jobs and economic opportunities. Now, if we somewhere points out the environmental significance of this, we will get to see pedestrian friendly cities encourage non motorized transport, which increase the walkability and helps to reduce congestion, fuel consumption, and the most important part, pollution. And at last, if there is a healthy environment and a walkable space, we get to see a public health significance into it, where walking promotes physical fitness and active lifestyle, and it also helps to combat lifestyle diseases linked to sedentary behavior, or if we see, for example, obesity. Now, once we have seen the significance of this very key idea or the right which have been ensured by the Supreme Court, now let's see what were its key observation while it was delivering such important judgment. The Supreme Court observed that walking has become increasingly difficult because of rapid motorization and has somewhere marginalized the pedestrian in urban spaces. At the same point of time, Supreme Court has also observed that pedestrians are often treated as the obstacle rather than the correct notion of legitimate user of the footpath. The second, it somewhere had an idea while delivering the judgment was footpaths are essential for public infrastructure, where pavements primarily belong to the pedestrian and must remain to them and accessible to them. Second would be the safe footpath are necessary for ensuring mobility and dignity for all those sections which are dependent to that. And last, if we see somewhere, it puts the obligation towards the state, stating its state responsibility that the government have a constitutional duty to provide a safe pedestrian infrastructure to its citizen, and compensation after accident cannot be a substitute to preventive urban planning was the most crucial idea or the most crucial part of the judgment. Now, once we have seen the key observations made by the Supreme Court during this delivery of this judgment, let's see the major challenges which are being faced by the pedestrian currently, so that we can draw a correct idea what are the challenges the government might face implementing this idea into reality. First would be lack of continuous footpath, where most Indian cities lack continuous and well designed pedestrian pathways in place. We see a encroachment of public space where there is forced pedestrian onto road, increasing the accident on road. There is vehicle-centric urban planning, where most of the focus or most of the planning aspect is given to vehicle mobility, and their counterparts, the pedestrian, are given the least important. The next is the fragmented regulated policies or the framework regarding this. India lacks a dedicated national protection pedestrian right, which is not true for its counterpart for its vehicular movement. The next, there is weak urban governance in place. There is, even there is lack of proper framework, and secondly there is poor implementation and limited municipality capacity, which hinders the pedestrian infrastructure development. And last and not the least is the road safety concern, where pedestrian remains among the most vulnerable victims of the road accident, where the dedicated space which have been provided to them are being encroached to some or the other reason, and whenever they are shifting to the roads, they are being the victim of road accident. Therefore, it somewhere points out to a road safety concern. Now we can better understand what would be the challenges in implementing right to walk by the government. We would see there would be a conflict of informal livelihood, because the encroachment which has been done in the pedestrian path is somewhere related to informal livelihood, where the government should be balancing the pedestrian right and the street vendors livelihood, which will remain the biggest challenge, how to balance both of them. The next would be the weak enforcement culture in place, where we get to see legal recognition alone cannot ensure compliance without its effective enforcement. We will also see in the policies which are being mentioned of it to get a better picture. The next would be the limited financial resources which we have, where urban local body often allocate inadequate fund for the pedestrian infrastructure, as I was speaking of, in comparison to its counterpart vehicular movement, and the absence of public awareness in place, the most important part, where people or the citizen of this country lack the awareness, most of them I would say lack the awareness regarding the pedestrian right of way, which contributes to somewhere unsafe and unsafe road behavior. Now, if we see a basic some of the lessons from other policy experiments experience, so as to draw holistic way forward, the first would be the Street Vendors Act 2014, where legal protection without effective implementation of it failed to deliver the intended outcome which have been imagined. The same which I was talking about in the weak enforcement culture. The next part, when we see COT PA 2003 part, we see there is sustained awareness and enforcement are crucial for behavioral changes. Therefore, in this case also, even we have proper infrastructure, proper governance and proper law in place, we need a cultural shift where the citizen of this country has to understand the benefits and the associated challenges if not following those rules. And the last idea, if we take from the Swachh Bharat mission, we will get to see there is the citizen responsibility must be complemented with adequate public infrastructure in place. Not only the citizen but the counterpart, the government or the enforcement part should be also stringent, so as to provide the better or the best infrastructure in place so that the citizen can use that. Now, keeping in all those ideas in mind, if we now draw a holistic way forward in place, it will look like this. The first would be a comprehensive pedestrian right framework in place, so as to properly mention all the recorded facts which have been, or the key observation which has been observed by the Supreme Court should be collectively somewhere kept in a single part, so as to ease the implementation aspect, where establishing national standard recognizing pedestrian as the primary road user. The next would be continuous and accessible footpath. Once you ensure there is pedestrian footpath in place, you should make that the process continuous. You should ensure that future encroachment are being stopped. Build a universal accessible footpath for all users. Now, complete road safety approach, where design road for pedestrian, cyclist, public transport and vehicular alike should be treated equally. Increase urban infrastructure funding to create a dedicated funding stream for the pedestrian infrastructure which has been lagging behind. Integrate street vendors through planning because it links to livelihood. develop a designated vendor zone where these vendors can balance their livelihood without compromising the mobility of the citizen. At the same point of time, strengthen the road safety measures in place so as to improve the crossing, signage, traffic calming, and enforcement aspect. And at last, promote a behavioral change in place where foster a culture that respect pedestrian rights. They are not being treated as alien or obstructed, but the natural user through public awareness and campaigns. Now, once the way forward done, now let's briefly see the conclusion, which will give us a fair idea of the article. The conclusion can be stated like this: realizing the right to walk requires pedestrian centric planning, stronger governance, and investment in safe, inclusive, and urban infrastructure. With that, I would conclude today's session. I hope today's session was indeed helpful for your preparation. And if you think so, I would like you to like this video and subscribe to Rice IS YouTube channel so as to get updated with this kind of videos. Thank you once again. Keep preparing.